The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to Wellness Wednesday on W4CY Radio and the Entertainment Network. My name is Holly Kenley. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and host of Kenley's Keys for Recovery. Thank you for tuning in. It's so good to be with you. I often say wellness awaits each of us. We choose the time. By listening in today, you have chosen wellness. I believe that most people want to be healthy in their lives, and yet sometimes we need a little help, and that's what this show is about. We are here to inform you and restore you. What do I mean by that? Well, each week we will take a topic of recovery. It might be something like grief or addiction or depression, or it could be a social issue or behavior that presents a challenge to our mental health or well-being. That could be something like domestic violence or betrayal or bullying, or it could be both. And each week, we're going to do two things. First, we're going to grab hold of keys to understanding what you are experiencing or going through. You see, I believe that when we have an understanding as to what is going on and why, that in and of itself is the first step in recovering. Secondly, we're going to get the keys to unlock your recovery. We're going to examine specific healing steps, strategies, tools, exercises to become engaged in our recovery. This is important. I believe that there are no quick fixes. Recovery is not a noun or an adjective. It's a verb. It takes time and it takes hard work. Many times you're going to hear me use the word recovering with an ing in the end. I use that because, sayings and platitudes are wonderful, but only if you put them into action. An ing at the end, recovering, means action. And this is also important. We're going to move one step at a time, one day at a time, sometimes even one breath at a time. We're not going to cover 15 topics in 15 minutes or 20 different things to change. Why? Because when we feel overwhelmed with too much information, I believe we won't do any of it. Lastly, what makes this show special is that we're going to work hard at staying with the topics and themes of each month. However, if something comes up in the news or you let me know about topics that interest you, we may dive into those. And if it's not in my area of expertise, I will tell you and look for resources that can help you. I do want to mention that some topics may not be appropriate for minors, and I will let you know. On today's show, we're going to be discussing bullying and cyberbullying. We'll be back in about 60 seconds. Get a piece of paper and a pencil. You may want to take some notes. Let's start today. Let's start now. Let's grab the keys and begin unlocking your recovering. Welcome back. This is Holly Kenley, licensed marriage and family therapist and host of Kenley's Keys for Recovery. October has so many important issues. We have bullying, domestic violence, breast cancer awareness. All of these are important, and we're going to be covering all of them. So we may need to go into November because they're all so important. Today, though, we're going to take a look at bullying and cyberbullying. First, we're going to get some background information under our belts, find out what it is and what it isn't, and then we're going to get some keys to understanding it so that we can deal with it. As a therapist, when I look at most disorders or social issues, I look at it from 3 viewpoints. First, intervention, how to step in and make it better for the short term and the long term. Secondly, I look at it from a protection viewpoint, how to help someone get safe, and hopefully stay safe. And thirdly, from prevention, how to stop it from getting worse or from happening at all. All 3 of these are very important. However, all are very different, and we're going to tackle each one. Today, when we look at cyberbullying and bullying, we're going to look at keys for intervention. First, though, let's get some background information and knowledge. Let's start with understanding what is going on. Lots of times I'm asked, Holly, what is bullying and what is cyberbullying? In most cases, bullying and cyberbullying are a learned behavior. Let me say that again. It's a learned behavior. I say that because we are not born bullies. And this is important for later because if we learn it, we can unlearn it. And we're going to talk more about that when we get to prevention. There are exceptions, of course, and that is when we might have an individual who has some type of underlying mental health issues, pathology, or disorders. And we are going to talk more about that in a little bit. I want you to know that both bullying and cyberbullying are considered aggressive behaviors. What I mean by that is that they are harmful behaviors. We know that bullying and cyberbullying can be what we considered proactive aggression, meaning that an individual deliberately intends to harm someone. Or both cyberbullying and bullying can be reactive aggression. In other words, an individual was reacting to some harm that they received. They were provoked and they were responding or reacting in an aggressive way. Because there's some confusion sometimes about what bullying is and quote-unquote normal conflict, oftentimes I'm asked that, Holly, what is the difference? Is there a difference? I want to give you a definition. And there's also sometimes confusion because there's so many different definitions out there. In fact, because there's so many different definitions, sometimes it's hard to get really accurate or sound research on cyberbullying and bullying. But I'm going to give you a definition for bullying and cyberbullying that many of the experts agree upon. And I want you to listen carefully. This is a definition of bullying. It is an aggressive, willful, or deliberate behavior carried out by a group or individual repeatedly and over time. And this part is very important as well, against a victim who cannot easily defend him or herself. So again, we know it's willful, we know it's deliberate, we know it's by a group or individual repeatedly and over time against a victim who perceives that he or she cannot easily defend him or herself. The only thing that we want to add with cyberbullying is that it's any form of electronic communication. Now, lots of times when I talk with parents or guardians, they think, well, it's mainly the posts on the social networking sites. However, we know that texting is a very popular venue for initiating a cyberbullying act or aggression. Also, emails, tweeting, voicemails. Remember, any kind of electronic communication can involve cyberbullying. Now, what is the difference between bullying and normal conflict? There's one huge difference. Normal conflict, in other words, peer against peer or group against group, there is an equal balance of power. That might be in strength, that might be in number, and it might also be in the kind of aggression that's being perpetrated. But there is an equal balance of power. With either bullying or cyberbullying, there is an unequal balance of power. In face-to-face bullying, or what we call traditional bullying, again, a person or a group might be outnumbered. The other group might have more strength, bigger in size. With cyberbullying, they can be outnumbered not only by the dozens, but by hundreds, because of the way that it takes form on the internet, with hundreds going against one or going against a small group. So that is the big difference. And normal conflict is handled differently than bullying or cyberbullying. Sometimes I'm asked, Holly, is it bullying or cyberbullying if it's a one-time occurrence? Now, just a minute ago, you heard me say in the definition that it's repeated and over time, and that is important. As a therapist, I worked heavily in the areas of abuse and trauma. So certainly when I was working with an individual that abuse or trauma had happened one time, it could have indeed been very injurious. So when we are talking with children, we want to consider two things. One, we want to look at the impact it has had on the child. I was talking to a parent at a conference, and she was telling me that her son in middle school was shoved up against a locker. It only happened one time, but he was hurt, and he did not feel safe. Now, appropriate intervention steps were taken, and it didn't happen again. But again, checking in with that child, he was hurt, and he didn't feel safe. So we don't want to minimize it if it was a one-time occurrence. Another thing to remember when we're checking in with children is to look at the kind of bullying or cyberbullying. Another example is that I was talking to a mom, again at a conference or a workshop, and her high school daughter came home one day and she was kind of upset. And she showed her a text that she had received to her mom where she had been excluded from an overnight get-together with some other girls. Her feelings were hurt. She felt very hurt by the exclusion. Now, it only happened one time, and the young lady was able to deal with it. She did feel safe, and it did not, as I said, happen again. So, in other words, this was important. We don't want to minimize it, but it didn't happen again, and she did feel safe. I do want to mention with exclusion that is a type of cyberbullying, and many times it starts in that very subtle way and escalates from that point forward and does get worse. So we don't want to minimize it. Another thing that we want to get under our belts in talking about cyberbullying, and this is so important for parents and guardians as well as educators, is that we know that there is a lot of crossover in the roles with a bully and a victim. What do I mean by that, and why is this important? First of all, it's important when we're talking to our kids that we understand that there is this great crossover. And again, what do I mean? Well, as a therapist or a parent, if I find out that a child that I am talking with has problems with bullying, it's interesting because chances are that this child is also a victim of bullying and cyberbullying. We know in the research that when we look at the role of a child, whether it's in victimization or in the bullying role, that there's over 60% chance that there can be crossover. So again, we want to ask the right questions. Are they involved just in the bullying? Are they cyberbully? Or are they considered a cyberbully victim or a bully victim, meaning that they can be both? Now, another very important role that sometimes we don't address, we'll hear children talking about these bullies or these victims. Well, how do they know? Did they see it? So we want to find out if they are a bystander, or sometimes what I refer to as a cyberstander. And why is that important? We're going to talk more about this later, but because they can play such an important role in stepping up and helping to stop the cyberbullying or the bullying. Another question that's oftentimes asked of me is, Holly, why do kids bully in the first place? What is it that is going on with them? And there are three really important reasons, and this comes from the research, and not in any particular order, but let me give them to you. The first reason is that because kids want to feel better about themselves, and we say that they want power and control. But it is important to understand that they sometimes do not feel good about themselves. They might have had injuries or injustice or feel insecure or inadequate. I want to tell you kind of an interesting story, and this is about my husband, is that, and he is one of the most kind, generous, gentle human beings on this planet, and I've known him a long time. When he was a child, he was a bully, and he admits that. In first, second, third, and into fourth grade. He grew faster, he was bigger, he was stronger. And every day in first, second, and third grade, and a little bit into fourth, after he had been a bully, especially out on the playground, the principal brought him into his office and spanked him every single day at lunch, after lunch. And it's funny because when my husband tells the story, he said, if the principal had called my dad just one time, that bullying would have stopped. Now, the unfortunate or sad part of the story is that, and it doesn't justify the bullying that my husband did, but the reason he bullied is that he could not read. He went through first, second, and third and into fourth grade before a teacher finally discovered that he couldn't read, took him under her wing, taught him to read and some other things, and redirected his course. So that is one reason, power and control. Another reason is that when children were surveyed, is they said that they think it is fun or it's cool, and they don't really see anything wrong with it. You see, it was interesting when children have been surveyed, they've said that bullying, especially cyberbullying, is just an extension of what goes on in the real world. And they see it happening in the real world, and so they just carry that over into their online world. A third reason that I've already mentioned is for revenge and retaliation. Children, individuals just get fed up, they get sick of it, they're sick and tired of being bullied, of being beat up. And again, I'm not justifying it. I'm just saying out of revenge and retaliation, they bully or cyberbully in return. And then one other thing that I want to mention, and I did mention this earlier, is that we don't want to discount that there could be some underlying emotional or mental health issues. And those, as we know, are so important. Recently, in the past several years, we've had some extremely violent acts take place in our country and other countries as well, involving individuals where there was, we find out later, underlying pathology or mental health issues. Again, we're not justifying it. We're just saying how important it is to find out if those issues are there. I'd like to just conclude this section and getting some understanding under our belt by responding to a question or a concern that I've been asked a few times. Individuals say, Holly, aren't bullying and cyberbullying just a rite of passage? Don't kids just need to toughen up? And, we lived through it. Why can't they? Is it really worse today? Well, I'm of the baby boomer age, and I know that, of course, there was bullying when I was growing up and even when my parents were growing up. But what makes it so different is that bullying usually does start at school or at the mall or, in some social setting, but then it's carried over into the cyber world. And when I was growing up, we didn't have this going on 24/7. And so, in my opinion, yes, it is worse, and it is harder to deal with. Here's what we know. That this is not only a national problem, but it's an international problem with countries that, with most developed, if not all developed countries, have a problem with this. Here in the United States, we know that 160,000 students approximately stay home from school every day for fear of being bullied or because they are bullied. We know that 1 in 3 will be cyberbullied in his or her school lifetime, and that's a conservative estimate. And tragically and horrifically, we have been hearing about young people who are taking their lives because of cyberbullying and bullying. Now, in some cases, and I want to make sure that this is heard, we know that bullying and cyberbullying is a strong contributing factor or a direct link. However, in other cases, it may not be a direct cause or the only reason. We know that with suicide, there are lots of contributing factors. But in recent research with victims or bullies of cyberbullying or traditional bullying, or even a child who is a bystander, our research tells us that these children are at higher risk for suicide. When we started our conversation today, we said that bullying is a behavior, and it is an abusive behavior. I don't believe it's a rite of passage. We're going to take a short break, and when we return, we're going to get 3 keys to intervene: how to step in, how to recognize what is going on, and what to do next. You're listening to Kenley's Keys to Recovery. We'll be right back. This is Holly Kenley, licensed marriage and family therapist and host of Kenley's Keys for Recovery. We've been discussing the keys to understanding bullying and cyberbullying, what it is and what it isn't. And now we're going to move on to 3 keys for parents, guardians, and others to intervene. I do want to share that a lot of the information, or at least some of the information that I'm going to be going over right now, is on my blog today. I've posted it this morning, so that if you don't catch all of the information, you can go back and get some of these keys from my blog. And I'll give that information at the end of the show today. The first key that I'm going to start with, and this is a question that I'm asked over and over again regarding no matter what the issue is with kids. Holly, how do I begin the conversation with my kids? How do I even start to talk with them? I'd like you to remember something, and this is true not only of bullying and cyberbullying, but other issues where children are victimized. Let's remember that kids don't want to share what is going on with them, and that's for several reasons. First, they don't believe that they're going to be believed, and even if they are believed, they don't believe that anyone is going to do anything about it. And oftentimes they're afraid of retaliation, or that the bullying or the cyberbullying is going to get worse. And in many cases, it does get worse before it gets better, unfortunately. And then let's also remember that if our children are involved in the bullying piece or the cyberbullying piece, they're thinking that they might get in trouble if they're part of that equation. So kids, are reluctant to talk to us anyway. So we want to make sure that we make this conversation as comfortable as possible. I'm going to give you a few suggestions for starting a conversation with them. And this first one might sound kind of strange, given that we are so connected to our technology. But what we need to do is we need to put our technology away, or just turn it off or shut it down for a while. And that can be at the dinner table or even when we're in the car. But we need to have some face-to-face and one-on-one time conversation with them. When we do that, we want to use open-ended questions. If you ask your child, how was school today? They're going to say, great. Or, did you have any problems at school today? No. So anyway, we want to ask open-ended questions like, what was the best thing that happened at school today? Or, finish this sentence. The saddest thing or the worst thing that happened to me at school today was. So, put the technology away and ask open-ended questions. Another thing that we can do is that we can share stories about ourselves or about other people that we know. Our kids want to know, our children want to know that did we struggle in middle school, in elementary school, in high school, and what were some of those struggles? It may not be the same as bullying or cyberbullying, but this connects with them and they can relate to us better. Don't go on and on about it, but just give an example of something you might have struggled with. A third thing that you can do is talk about cases in the news. Now, some of the ones in the news are pretty horrific, so you want to make sure that they're age appropriate. But talk about examples in your town, in your school, in your neighborhood, or again, ones that are in the news, but make sure that you make them, again, so they're not terrifying or horrifying for our young ears. And another great thing that I know that many parents have done and guardians is that they'll watch a movie. The movie Bully came out about a year ago, and that's now available on DVD. Now, that is rated PG-13, but there are other good movies that Lifetime has put out that are very age appropriate. Watch it and discuss it with them. So start that conversation and use some of these tools to begin that conversation. Another thing that's really important in your conversation is your vocabulary. As a therapist, when I'm talking with a young person, I will not just say, have you been involved in bullying or are you being bullied? I will get very specific because kids oftentimes will just say, well, no, I'm not involved in bullying. But I will often say, well, have you been pushed? Have you been kicked, punched? I was a high school teacher and a middle school teacher for many years before I was a therapist, and there was so much teasing and taunting and humiliating that went on, where young people were really dehumanized and disregarded. I remember in particular that there would be kids who would put notes on other kids' backs that said things like, kick me, or I'm stupid, or just kind of push them in the hallway. These are examples of bullying. So be really specific. Oftentimes we don't see the outward scars or injuries or bruises, but believe me, they are there on the inside. A few months ago, actually it's been almost probably about a year, there was a news article on the TV, and I'm going to talk about this more at the end of our program today, but a young girl, a special needs girl, high school girl who had been bullied and teased a lot all through school. When she got into high school, at the lunchroom, kids were throwing food and trash at her. That is certainly an example of bullying. And actually, this story has a kind of a really interesting and cool ending to it. Again, I'm going to share that at the end of the show. With cyberbullying, again, it's a little bit more tricky because there's so many types and kinds. Parents oftentimes don't know what to look for, or they don't know the right questions to ask. So I'm just going to name a few for you. And in my book, Cyberbullying No More, which is on the radio website and my own website, there's a lot more information on this. One kind of cyberbullying is exclusion. So when you ask your children, have you been cyberbullied? They might say no. But if you said, have you ever been left out of something? Have you ever been not included in something? And how did that make you feel? Another thing is that we often think of the very obvious kinds of being degraded, like being made fun of your race or your religion, your ethnicity, or your sexual orientation. But also kids are always made fun of for their looks, their clothing, if they look different. So we want to be very specific and ask them about that. Another very subtle kind of cyberbullying, and parents or guardians don't often ask about this because it's very embarrassing for our children. Maybe they've told a secret to someone, and maybe they have sent pictures of themselves, sometimes very private or intimate pictures of themselves to a friend or to a boyfriend or a girlfriend. And then after that friendship is not really good anymore, those quote-unquote friends have sent out that information, those texts, those pictures to other people or put it on the web. So those kinds of cyberbullying are called secrecy, trickery, outing. So again, have this vocabulary under your belt. And another very common, and this will be the last one I'll give you example for cyberbullying, is catfishing. This has been in the news recently where someone sets up a false profile and finds out, befriends an individual, finds out information, and then tricks them into giving out more information about them. So, our first key in how to start a conversation with our children is to make it comfortable, make it safe, be a good listener, and connect with them, and use the right vocabulary. And remember, they may feel ashamed, they may feel embarrassed, and may want to not want to share. So take your time with them. Okay, the next key we're going to take a look at is really important. What do parents and guardians look for if they think that their child may be being bullied or cyberbullying? What are some of the signs? Just a little over a week ago, I was at an author event at a conference in the Bay Area in California. I was there to meet other authors, of course, and also to sell my books and talk about my books. And a woman came up to my table, and she saw my Cyberbullying No More book, and we started talking. And her son, who is now in college, she said, Holly, I had no idea that he went all through high school being bullied and cyberbullied. And she said, but when I look back now, and as I'm looking through your book, I see that he spent so much time alone in his room. But what confused me is that he stayed on his technology, and I thought he was fine when actually some of the cyberbullying was happening, obviously, online. So anyway, we're going to talk about that in just a minute as one of the signs. Also, I was talking to a parent at a conference last year, and again, he said he had no idea his son was being cyberbullied because he spent so much time on his computer. And it wasn't until his dad actually opened up the computer and took a look after seeing his son so upset. So it's interesting that kids will sometimes, stay on their technology even after they are being cyberbullied. All right, what are some other things that we can look for? I mentioned being alone. This is hard with especially adolescents and teens, but look for changes in their behavior. Believe me, I know that they can be moody, but look for a pattern where they've been, their behavior has changed. They're typically kind of a upbeat, kind of positive kid, and they've been moody or depressed or sad for a longer period of time. A second thing is to look for sadness or depression, but more so in adolescents and teens, we see anxiety and we see anger. We see that they're easily agitated. Remember that in young people, depression oftentimes looks like anger. Also, they may be sleeping more than usual, or they may have trouble sleeping. We know that with victims of bullying and cyberbullying, where it's happened over a long period of time, that they have some of the same symptoms as post-traumatic stress disorder, and they may be having nightmares, and as I said, not be able to sleep. This last one is really important. Look for a change in their routine or in their friends. Many bullies, the kids who are being bullied or cyberbullied, don't want to go to school, or they stop going to the usual places, or they're not doing the same activities. They don't want to go to soccer practice when they've been going before. Again, they may be embarrassed, ashamed, or afraid. Okay, those are just some of the signs that I want you to look for. Again, it can be very subtle, but if you see any of these can be red flags. So this is the time to sit down, have a conversation with your children. The third key, today we're going to talk about, we've got some signs, we know how to kind of start a conversation with our children. Now we have a strong feeling, or we do know that they are a victim, or perhaps they're bullying, or maybe even both. How do I step in? How do I intervene? Again, there's a lot of information on this on my website and also in my book, Cyberbullying No More. So I'm going to give you 3 three strategies for victims and three strategies for bullies. And I know this is a lot of information to take in, so I'm going to try to slow it down for just a minute. But before I do that, I want to address a question that I am asked many, many times by parents and guardians and even by educators. Holly, do I snoop? Isn't technology their private world? Well, my answer to this is, and I am chuckling a little bit, but I am serious when I say this. This is important. No matter what the social issue is, whether it's drugs or alcohol or bullying or violence or whatever it might be, it's easier to do the hard work up front than to live with the heartache in the end. So many times I have seen parents in person or in the news crying and sobbing, and their hearts are broken with the tragedies that have happened with their children. And they say the words, "I didn't know," or "I didn't know how bad it was." So yes, I believe that you need to monitor and we need to supervise. And we're going to talk more about this next week when we talk about protection. So I don't like to use the word snooping, but I do believe as parents and as guardians, as educators, that we do need to be responsible. And it is not private when it comes to the safety and the well-being of our children. Okay, let's get started on what we do next. I'm going to give you three strategies for victims, and I put this under the three S's. The first S is support. When we're talking with a child that we know that is a victim, we need to let them know that we believe them. We need to hear their story. We need to find out, as I talked about earlier, how long this has been going on, what kind of bullying or cyberbullying it is, and the impact on the child. Remember, very important, we don't want to minimize it. If it is something minor, then we can adjust what we're going to do, but we don't want to minimize it. And we want them to know that we're going to do whatever we can to make it better. The second S is that we want to put a safety net around this child. Now, this involves a lot of different things, but one thing that is important, and parents and guardians ask me this, Holly, do I report it? Well, that's kind of a tricky question, because if the child is in danger of harming themselves or harming another individual, as a therapist, as a mandated reporter, I have to report that. It is sometimes good to consult with another individual or even just check in with the school authorities or law enforcement and see if you need to report it. With technology, there are a lot of safety measures that we're going to put in place. And again, I'm going to talk about that more next week. There may be appropriate to put into a buddy system in place or perhaps even counseling in place. And the last S are social skills. Many times victims are targeted. What I mean by that is that they're picked on because they are shy, because they are seen to have low self-worth or self-esteem. They're much more introverted because they don't stand up for themselves. And so we know that sometimes with a few assertiveness skill building under their belt, that they can really be empowered. Using I statements, learning how to stand up for themselves. Also, sometimes it helps to get them into some group therapy. But oftentimes, even a sports or an activity will help to build their strength and their confidence, and getting them around other kids in a team effort around children who really care about them and will stand up with them. So for the victims, the three S's: support, safety, and social skills. Now, for the bully, I'm going to give you the three C's. This is so important. What we want to remember with the bully, remember we started our conversation today that bullying is a behavior. So what we want to do is change the behavior. One of the mistakes that many parents and guardians and other people as well, educators, counselors as well, make is that they punish the child. Now, there is a place for punishment, but it should not be the sole way to deal with it. Or parents or guardians, just take the technology away. Remember this, those two things, punishment alone and taking the technology away, is not going to change the behavior. Okay, so the first C is consequences. Yes, of course, there should be consequences. Now, let's go back and think for just a moment about why bullies bully. We looked at three things. One, because they think it's cool or for fun, for revenge or retaliation, for power or control, because remember, they're not feeling good about themselves. So ask and find out what the reason is that the bully is bullying. Because certainly if they're bullying out of revenge or retaliation, the punishment is going to, or the consequence, is going to look a lot different than if they're bullying because it's just fun or cool. So we want to make sure that the consequences match the offense and that they are meaningful consequences. There are appropriate consequences. Again, there's more on my website and in my book. The second thing is I'm a strong believer in behavioral contracts. So we want to put the child on a contract. For cyberbullying, I'm going to address this next week. We're going to talk about a family online safety contract or agreement. I believe that every family should have one in place. For traditional bullying or regular bullying, we want to have a contract that changes their behavior, again, finding out why they're doing what they're doing, and then enforce that with positive reinforcement. I believe children need to earn their rights back. Yes, you can take or cut back on their technology or take it away and give it back as they earn their rights, showing responsibility. With freedom comes responsibility. One of the best consequences or appropriate behaviors to implement in changing this behavior around is to have the bully make meaningful amends for his or her actions. Now, there's some controversy over that, but I do believe if it's done appropriately and done meaningfully, that it can be very, very effective. We know that empathy, having empathy for another individual and showing that empathy can really change that behavior around. And the last C, we've said consequences, we said a contract. Now, the last C would be counseling. Earlier, I mentioned that there could be some underlying issues. There may be anger. This child may have experienced abuse, insecurity, injustices, may be feeling very inadequate and is acting out for those reasons. There may be other clinical disorders or psychiatric issues in place. And so, especially if the bullying has been going on or cyberbullying for a long period of time and it's extremely serious, we want to make sure that this child is assessed and addressed. If we have a child that's in the role of both the bully and the victim, of course, we want to implement all of these strategies and tools. Okay, as we're getting ready to finish our conversation today, we've taken a look at bullying and cyberbullying. We have keys to better understand what it is and what it isn't. And we've grabbed hold of 3 keys for intervening when our children are being bullied or when they are doing the bullying. I started our conversation today with the words that bullying and cyberbullying are learned behaviors. And the good news is, as I said, that those behaviors can be unlearned. They can be changed. I also mentioned that bystanders play a huge role in this. And I want to close with a story. I mentioned a little earlier about a young high school girl. She was a special needs girl that was in the news in our area. Again, I think it's probably been close to about a year ago. And I'm going to give her the name Tammy. What I remember from the story is that and this was her mom was on the news, is that she was in an accident as a young girl. I believe it was a car accident, and she was very disabled from that accident. And although she was teased, and by the way, special needs children, individuals are targeted more highly than other children, although that she was teased through elementary and middle school, it really got bad when she was in high school. Tammy's mom, and I will call her Sophia, got so frustrated. She was trying so many different things and really doing all the right things other than just going and being with her daughter at school, which she didn't want to do or chose not to do. So Sophia, out of frustration, called one of her friends. And her friend, whose name was Liza's son, was a quarterback on the high school football team. And I'll give him the name of James. Sophia called Liza and she said, Liza, I don't know what to do anymore. Tammy is being bullied, especially at the lunchroom at school, and she's just so humiliated and embarrassed and ashamed. I just am at my wit's end. I don't know what to do anymore. I'm wondering if your son James could do anything to help her. Well, Liza talked to her son James, knew that he was a leader at school. He was a hero at school. And this story always gets to me because what James did is he heard about this and he got some of his high school football friends. And from that point forward, they went into the lunchroom and every day they sat with Tammy. In fact, they took Tammy under their wing and actually made her, I believe it was the water girl on the football team. The rest of Tammy's high school days from that point forward changed completely. And the point of this story is it shows the power of bystanders. It shows what happens when we stop a behavior and when we step in and stand up for other individuals. This subject of bullying and cyberbullying, it really sometimes is so frustrating to me because there's so many issues out there that our children are subject to, so many really toxic influences like drinking and drugs and weapons and other things. And it's so hard to control those. In fact, they are out of our control. But with bullying and cyberbullying, we are talking about the condition of the human spirit. We are the source and we are the cause, or we know someone who is. And we have the power to change that. We can turn that around. We can change this toxic behavior. Okay, as we come to a close for today, we've covered a lot of information. And I want to give you a little bit of homework. I want you to put this into action. I want you to put it to work. And what I'd like you to do, whether you think your children are being bullied or cyberbullied or whatever their role might be, or they're being a bystander, is I want you to start to have meaningful conversations with them about these topics. I want you to put away the technology once a day, set it aside, and to start that conversation, bring in the right vocabulary, be a good listener, and I also want you to pay attention to the signs, to the red flags, and step in and intervene if you think it's appropriate or necessary. But most importantly, start having that conversation. Next week, we are going to spend one more program on cyberbullying and bullying on these strategies. But we're going to look at protection and we're going to look at prevention. You won't want to miss that. Some important information coming up. In the meantime, email me your questions, your stories, your experiences, or if you have some tools that have worked for you. You can go to my website at www.hollykenley.com, and that's Holly with an I, or email me at holly@hollykenley.com. I so look forward to hearing from you, and I'd love to have your feedback. I'll be sure and respond if you email me. I'd like to close today with saying what I started out with. Wellness awaits each of us. We choose the time. Now is your time. grab the keys and unlock your recovery. And until next time, believe and be well.